The betrayal happened again. Dr. Parker's words, the ones that destroyed my career and ultimately led to my death, were reborn in my memory as I opened my eyes to a strange hospital ceiling. Dr. Mira Chen's research methodology is fundamentally flawed, he had announced to the investors, his voice dripping with false regret. I'm afraid we'll need to remove her from the project before proceeding to patent. A wave of disorientation washed over me as I tried to sit up. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room burned my nostrils, sharp, clean, and terrifyingly familiar. Where was I? Who was I now? My fingers clutched at the thin blanket, the rough texture grounding me as memories from two different lives collided in my mind. Take it easy, a nurse cautioned, gently pressing me back against the pillows. You've been in a coma for 3 weeks after your accident. Accident. Yes. The brakes failing on my car just 2 days after I'd confronted Parker about stealing my research. The police had called it a tragic accident. I had known better even as my car plummeted off the bridge into the icy waters below. I remembered drowning, the water filling my lungs as I struggled, my last thoughts full of rage that Parker would get away with everything. And yet, here I was, alive. But not as Dr. Mira Chen. According to the chart the nurse checked, I was Nora Ellis, age 29, recent graduate with a degree in biochemistry, victim of a hit and run that had left me comatose. Your family will be so relieved, the nurse continued, checking my vitals. They've been here every day. Family? I had no family. Dr. Mira Chen had been alone in the world. Perhaps that's why Parker had chosen me as his victim. No one to fight for me after I was gone. I'll let the doctor know you're awake, she said before leaving the room. Alone, I flexed my fingers, Nora's fingers, and tried to make sense of what had happened. The memory of my research project flooded back, making my heart race. The neural transfer protocol, the experimental treatment meant to preserve memories across traumatic brain injuries. The treatment Parker had called dangerous and unethical while secretly continuing the research without me. My research had worked. Somehow, impossibly, my consciousness had transferred into this body. I recalled the final night in my lab before Parker locked me out, the desperate injection I'd given myself, the backup plan I'd never believed would be necessary. I closed my eyes and summoned the complex molecular formula that had been my life's work. It appeared in my mind with perfect clarity, every compound, every sequence exactly as I'd designed it. Not just the formulation that Parker knew about, but the refined version I'd developed in secret. My hands trembled as I realized the power of my position. I had died. Dr. Mira Chen was gone, her reputation destroyed, her innovations stolen. But I remembered everything, and no one would be looking for me in this new body with this new identity. The doctor arrived asking simple questions to check my cognitive function. I answered carefully, playing the role of confused accident victim while my mind raced with possibilities. I would need to move carefully, learn who this Nora Ellis was, adapt to her life while formulating my plan. 3 months later, I stood outside the gleaming headquarters of Helix Innovations, Parker's biggest competitor. With my credentials, Nora's credentials, I'd secured an entry-level position in their research department. My previous expertise had been in neuroscience, but Nora's background in biochemistry gave me the perfect excuse to approach the memory preservation problem from a new angle. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, releasing a blast of climate-controlled air against my face. I adjusted my glasses, a new affectation to further distance myself from Mira's appearance, and stepped into the lobby with its polished marble floors and wall of cascading water. ID, please, the security guard requested. I handed over my new badge, heart pounding as I spotted a familiar figure crossing the atrium. Dr. Parker himself, deep in conversation with a young woman I recognized as Elise Chambers, his new protege. He'd moved quickly to replace me after my accident. The cologne hit me before he passed, that distinctive blend of sandalwood and something metallic that always clung to him. My stomach clenched as the scent triggered a flood of memories. The celebration dinner when we'd had our first breakthrough, the late nights in the lab, the proud introduction when he'd first brought me on stage at a conference. the scent that had filled my nostrils as he leaned in close during that final investor meeting to whisper, "I'm sorry it came to this, Mira." Parker walked right past me, his eyes sliding over me without a flicker of recognition. Of course. Why would he look twice at a new research assistant? Dr. Mira Chen had been his equal, a threat. Nora Ellis was nobody. I breathed deeply as they disappeared around a corner, forcing my clenched fists to relax. The guard returned my ID with a nod, and I made my way to the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished metal. Straight dark hair instead of Mira's curls. Glasses framing a younger face, different enough that even someone who had known me well might not see the resemblance. "Good morning, Miss Ellis," my new supervisor greeted me as I entered the lab. "Ready for your first day?" I smiled, the expression feeling strange on my face. How long had it been since I'd had reason to smile? "More than ready," I replied, hanging my coat on a hook by the door. The lab was smaller than the one I'd had at Parker's company, but the equipment was newer. My fingers itched to get started, to recreate the work that had been stolen from me. But I would be patient. I would observe, I would learn who to trust and who to avoid. And slowly, methodically, I would reclaim what was mine. The first few weeks at Helix passed in a blur as I established myself as Nora Ellis, quiet, competent, unassuming. I kept my head down, absorbed the office politics, and began my work. My supervisor, Dr. Levine, seemed pleased with my progress, assigning me increasingly complex tasks as I proved myself. I also learned the rhythm of Parker's visits to Helix. He came every Thursday for meetings with their business development team, always with Elise in tow. I made myself scarce on Thursdays, until the day he sought me out. "Miss Ellis?" His voice sent a shock through me as I bent over my microscope. "Dr. Levine speaks highly of your work." I straightened slowly, forcing myself to meet his eyes with the appropriate level of deference a junior researcher would show to a visiting dignitary. "Dr. Parker," I acknowledged, my voice carefully modulated to betray nothing of the rage boiling inside me. "Thank you. It's an honor to meet you." He smiled, that charming, wolf-like smile that had once made me feel special, chosen. Now I could see the calculation behind it. "I understand you're working on protein delivery systems for neurological applications," he said, glancing at my notes. "Interesting approach." "Just preliminary work," I murmured, casually sliding my notebook away from his gaze. "Nothing groundbreaking yet." His cologne enveloped me as he leaned closer, inspecting the samples arranged on my workbench. The scent made my head spin with memories. The day he'd announced me as his new research partner, the champagne we'd shared when our first trial succeeded. The pride in his voice when he'd introduced me to the board, before he'd decided I was expendable. "Well, keep at it," he said, straightening. "The field needs fresh perspectives." His gaze lingered on me for a moment, a slight furrow appearing between his brows. Did something about me seem familiar to him? My heart raced as I adjusted my glasses nervously. The moment passed. He nodded and moved on to the next workstation, Elise falling into step beside him, casting a curious glance back at me. I released the breath I'd been holding, my hands shaking slightly as I returned to my microscope. I'd passed the first test. He hadn't recognized me. But I'd seen something else in that brief encounter. The proprietary way Elise leaned toward him, the subtle touch of her hand on his arm as they walked away. History was repeating itself. Elise was his new Mira, the brilliant protege, the perfect partner. Until she too became inconvenient. I wondered if she was sleeping with him yet. If she believed, as I once had, that their connection was special, that he valued her mind above all else. The thought made me both sad and determined. I would save my pity for later. For now, I had work to do. That night, I stayed late in the lab, beginning the real work, reconstructing my neural transfer protocol under the guise of routine research. I modified my approach slightly, incorporating elements of Nora's biochemistry background to disguise the similarities to Dr. Chen's work. As I carefully documented my findings in a separate notebook that never remained in the lab, I felt a sense of déjà vu. Once again working in secret, hiding my true breakthroughs. But this time, I wouldn't be caught unprepared. This time, I would be the one who decided when to reveal the truth. The sound gave her away first, the distinctive click, click, click of Elise's expensive heels on the laboratory tile. I pretended not to notice her lingering outside my workstation, my attention seemingly absorbed in the cell cultures I was examining. Through my peripheral vision, I caught her casual glance around the lab, confirming we were alone during the lunch hour. Click, 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 closer now. Making progress, Nora? She asked, her voice honey-sweet as she stopped beside me. I looked up, offering a small, colleague-appropriate smile. Some. Dr. Levine seems encouraged. Mind if I take a look? Without waiting for permission, she leaned over my shoulder, the scent of her jasmine perfume almost suffocating in its intensity. Oh, interesting approach to the blood-brain barrier issue. I nodded, saying nothing as she flipped through my official lab notebook, the one containing carefully curated information, nothing too revolutionary, but promising enough to maintain my position. My real breakthroughs remained documented elsewhere. I'm heading to lunch, I said finally, standing and gathering my personal items. Feel free to review the data if you'd like. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Thanks, I'll just be a minute. I walked out, my footsteps measured and calm while my mind raced. The security camera in the corner would show Elise alone at my station for the next 15 minutes. It would capture her photographing my notes with her phone, her quick examination of the samples in my storage unit. Let her take it. Everything in that notebook was deliberately designed to look promising but lead nowhere significant if implemented incorrectly. A maze with no center. 2 weeks later, I sat in the monthly research presentation meeting, nervously fidgeting with my pen as Elise took the podium. My pulse quickened as she launched into her presentation, slides appearing on the screen behind her. My team has been exploring novel approaches to neurotransmitter preservation during trauma, she announced, her confident gaze sweeping the room. We've had a significant breakthrough in maintaining neural pathway integrity using a proprietary protein delivery system, my research. Stolen from my workstation and now presented as her original work, I pressed my pen harder against my notepad, focusing on the small pain to keep my expression neutral. Dr. Parker sat in the front row, nodding approvingly as Elise detailed her methodology. The same methodology he had once called flawed and dangerous when I proposed it. Questions? Elise asked as she concluded her presentation. I raised my hand, my voice steady despite the rage churning inside me. The blood-brain barrier penetration rates seem impressive. Have you addressed the potential cytotoxicity in hippocampal neurons at those concentrations? A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. It was a question she couldn't answer properly because she hadn't done the original research. I had. We've seen minimal cytotoxic effects in preliminary testing, she said smoothly, but we're continuing to optimize the formulation. Lie. She had no data on cytotoxicity because the notebook she'd stolen contained no such tests. I'd conducted those experiments months ago, as Mira, and knew precisely what modifications were needed to address the issue. I'd be interested to see that data, I said, my tone professionally curious. It might relate to some of my work. Elise's smile tightened. Of course, I'll have my assistant send it over. Data that would never arrive for tests that had never been conducted. After the meeting, my supervisor approached me. Good question in there, Ellis. Chambers seemed a bit thrown. I shrugged modestly, just thinking about potential applications for my own research. Well, keep thinking, but don't step on toes. Elise has Parker's ear, and that makes her untouchable around here. I nodded my understanding, struggling to suppress a bitter smile. I knew exactly how untouchable Parker's favorites could be, until they weren't. That night, I sat in my small apartment, the glow of my laptop illuminating the otherwise dark room. On the screen, the completed application for a provisional patent, filed under the name of a shell company I had established using Nora's identity and a portion of her inheritance. The patent covered not just the protein delivery system Elise had presented, but the critical improvements addressing the very cytotoxicity issues I'd raised. Improvements she didn't know existed because they weren't in the notes she'd stolen. I clicked submit, then sat back, exhaling slowly as a weight lifted from my shoulders. My fingers traced the smooth, cool surface of my desk as I savored the moment. The first countermove had been made. Over the next month, I watched as Elise's team rushed their research to clinical trials, cutting corners in their haste to be first to market. Parker made increasingly frequent appearances at Helix, his influence securing accelerated review processes for Elise's work. I continued my own research, submitting regular reports that showed steady but unspectacular progress. I became invisible, just another dedicated but unremarkable researcher in a building full of ambitious scientists. Then came the day everything changed. I was working late, the lab nearly empty, when Dr. Levine appeared at my workstation, accompanied by two men in expensive suits. The executive floor rarely ventured into the research labs. "Miss Ellis," Dr. Levine said, his voice unusually formal. "These gentlemen would like to speak with you, privately." I recognized one of them, Victor Kazan, Helix's CEO. The other was unfamiliar, but his calculating gaze suggested legal counsel. "Of course," I replied, removing my lab coat and following them to a conference room. Inside, Kazan wasted no time. "Miss Ellis, are you familiar with Neuropsych Holdings?" "The name of my shell company." I kept my expression neutral. "Should I be?" He slid a document across the table. "My patent application, now published." Neuropsych Holdings has just been granted a provisional patent for a neural pathway preservation system that bears a remarkable similarity to the work being conducted in our labs, Kazan said. "Work that you've been involved with." I examined the document with an appropriate level of surprise. "I don't understand. This isn't my patent." "Perhaps not directly," the lawyer interjected, "but our investigation shows that you are the sole beneficial owner of Neuropsych Holdings." I allowed a flush of guilt to color my cheeks, then straightened my shoulders. "Yes. I established Neuropsych to protect my personal research." "Research conducted using Helix resources," Kazan stated flatly. "No," I said firmly. "My employment contract with Helix clearly states that independent research conducted outside company hours using personal resources remains the intellectual property of the researcher. I've been meticulous about separating my work." The lawyer's expression shifted slightly. He knew I was right. The loophole existed in Helix's standard contracts, an oversight they had never bothered to correct because few researchers had the energy to pursue independent work after their demanding Helix schedules. "Furthermore," I continued, emboldened, "my patent contains significant innovations not present in Helix's current research program. Innovations that address critical safety concerns in the existing methodology." "Safety concerns," Kazan echoed. "Cytotoxicity in hippocampal neurons at the concentrations being used in the clinical trials Dr. Chambers is preparing," I explained. "I raised the issue at her presentation last month." A heavy silence fell over the room. Kazan and the lawyer exchanged glances. "You're saying our trial preparations may be compromised?" Kazan asked finally. The taste of victory was sweet as honey as I nodded solemnly. "Without the modifications detailed in my patent, yes. The current formulation could potentially cause irreversible damage to memory centers in the brain." Another long silence. Then Kazan leaned forward. "Miss Ellis, what exactly is it you want?" What did I want? Revenge had been my initial driver, to reclaim my stolen work and see Parker suffer. But sitting here now, I realized I wanted something more. I wanted to finish what I had started as Mira. I wanted to see my research help people as it was meant to do. A proper research position, I said, full funding, and control over the development of my patented technology. "That's a significant demand from a junior researcher," the lawyer observed. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not as junior as my position suggests." 3 hours later, I left the conference room with a new title, Director of Neuropsych Research, a division created specifically for me, and funding that exceeded anything I'd had before my death as Mira. As I gathered my belongings from my old workstation, I heard the now familiar click, click, click of Elise's heels approaching rapidly. Her face was flushed with anger, her eyes wild. "What did you do?" she hissed, keeping her voice low despite her obvious rage. "Clinical trials are suddenly postponed pending safety review? Kazan wants all my research transferred to you." I calmly placed my notebooks in my bag. "I didn't do anything, Dr. Chambers. I simply patented my own research before someone else could claim it as theirs." Her face paled. "You set me up. You left those notes for me to find." "Did I?" I smiled slightly. "That would be quite calculating." "Parker won't let this stand," she threatened. "He has influence with the board." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, zipping my bag closed. But he doesn't own the patent that Helix now needs to proceed safely. I do. As if summoned by his name, Parker appeared in the doorway of the lab, his expression thunderous. Elise immediately moved to his side, unconsciously mirroring the way I used to position myself when we were a team. "Miss Ellis?" he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I understand congratulations are in order." "Thank you, Dr. Parker." I shouldered my bag. "I'm looking forward to advancing this important work." His eyes narrowed as he studied me more intently than he had before. "Have we met previously? Before Helix?" A chill ran down my spine. "I don't believe so. I would remember meeting someone of your stature in the field." He continued to stare, something almost like recognition flickering in his eyes. Then he shook his head slightly. "My mistake. I look forward to seeing your contribution to the project." As I walked past them toward my new office, I caught the whispered exchange. "Do something," Elise urged. "She's going to ruin everything." "Patience," Parker murmured. "This may be an opportunity rather than an obstacle." I suppressed a shiver, knowing how dangerous Parker could be when presenting himself as an ally. I had fallen for it once. I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. The smell hit me first when I entered my new office, that distinctive cologne that had once represented mentorship and opportunity, now tainted with betrayal. Sandalwood and something metallic, lingering in the air like a warning. Parker had been here, waiting for me. Now he stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light, hands clasped behind his back in that characteristic pose I remembered so well. How many times had I seen him stand exactly like that in Mira's office, contemplating their next breakthrough? "Miss Ellis," he said, turning with a practiced smile. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to personally welcome you to your new position." "Dr. Parker," I acknowledged, setting my bag on the desk between us like a barrier. "This is unexpected." He gestured to the chair behind the desk. "Please, get comfortable. This is your domain now." I sat, watching him warily as he took the seat opposite me. Up close, I could see the changes time had wrought since Mira's death. New lines around his eyes, a certain tightness to his smile. Success had not brought him peace. "I've reviewed your patent application," he said without preamble. "Impressive work, especially from someone at your career stage." "Thank you." I kept my response neutral, neither proud nor humble. "In fact," he continued, leaning forward slightly, "it's remarkably similar to a research direction I was exploring with a colleague some years ago, before her unfortunate passing." My heart hammered against my ribs. Scientific progress often follows parallel paths. Indeed. His gaze was penetrating, searching. Elise is understandably upset about the delay to her clinical trials, but I see this differently. Your innovations could be the missing piece we've been searching for. "We?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'd like to propose a partnership," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate tone he used when offering something special, the same tone he'd used when inviting Mira to join his research team years ago. "Your patent, combined with our clinical trial infrastructure and industry connections, we could bring this to market within a year." "An interesting proposition," I said carefully, "though I'm now employed by Helix." He waved a dismissive hand. "Arrangements can be made. I have significant influence with Helix's board. What I'm offering is bigger than institutional affiliations. I'm talking about a true legacy." The cologne seemed to grow stronger as he leaned closer, filling my nostrils and making my stomach churn with disgust, where once it had triggered admiration. I fought the urge to recoil. "Why me?" I asked. "You have Elise." A flash of something, annoyance, impatience, crossed his face before his expression smoothed again. "Elise is brilliant in her way, but she lacks innovation. Your approach to the cytotoxicity issue demonstrates true insight. Insight he had once dismissed as dangerous and impractical when Mira proposed it." "I'll need time to consider," I said. "This is all happening very quickly." "Of course." He stood, straightening his immaculate jacket. "Take the weekend. We can discuss details on Monday." After he left, I sat motionless, processing what had just happened. Parker wanted my patent, badly enough to offer partnership instead of simply trying to discredit me, as he had with Mira. What had changed? The answer came 3 days later, when I was working late in my new lab space, a notification popped up on my computer. An email sent to Parker's account, misdirected to me due to a system-wide IT update that had scrambled some address book entries. The email was from the head of clinical safety review at Parker's company. Preliminary toxicity results concerning subject group showing hippocampal degradation at 72 hours post-treatment. Recommend immediate protocol modification or trial suspension. Details attached. Attached was data that confirmed my worst fears and validated my original concerns as Mira. They had proceeded with trials using the flawed methodology, and patients were suffering exactly the side effects I had predicted. I forwarded the email to my personal account before it could be recalled, then deleted it from my work system. Evidence secured, I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. This explained Parker's sudden interest in partnership. He needed my patented modifications to salvage his failing trials, and quite possibly to avoid lawsuits from trial participants already experiencing adverse effects. I decided to accept his partnership offer, but not before taking precautions. The next day, I visited Parker's company headquarters for our follow-up meeting, a recording device carefully concealed in my jacket pocket. The weight of it pressed against my ribs, a constant reminder of my purpose as I was escorted to his executive suite. His assistant, not Elise, I noted, ushered me in, then discreetly withdrew. "Nora," Parker greeted me, using my first name as if we were already close colleagues. "I'm delighted you could come." "Your offer was compelling," I said, taking the offered seat. "I've been reviewing the potential synergies between our work." "Excellent." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "We'll want legal to draft the necessary documents. Janet, please have Roger join us." While we waited for the lawyer to arrive, Parker outlined his vision for our partnership: the accelerated timeline, the marketing strategy, the prestigious journal where we would publish our findings. All the while, the recorder captured his every word. When Roger arrived with preliminary contracts, I listened carefully to the terms. Everything seemed reasonable on the surface: generous compensation, shared credit, mutual decision-making authority. Until a particular clause caught my attention. "Section 12.4, I said, pointing to the passage. "This gives you unilateral authority to determine research protocols and trial parameters." Parker smiled indulgently. "Standard language. Simply streamlines the decision-making process if we encounter obstacles." "And Section 18.2, I continued. "This makes me personally liable for any adverse outcomes from the technology's implementation, even if I disagree with the protocol." A flicker of annoyance crossed Parker's face before his smile returned. Merely legal prudence. It would never come to that between partners. But it would. That was exactly his plan: to use my modifications to salvage his trials, then blame me for any previous damage done to patients under the original flawed protocol. He needed a scapegoat, and I was being positioned perfectly for the role. "I see," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'd like my own legal team to review these before signing. Standard procedure." "Of course," Parker agreed, though his smile had cooled significantly. "Take all the time you need, within reason." As I left his office, I detoured to the restroom, locking myself in a stall as my hands trembled violently. I clutched the edge of the metal partition, its coldness seeping into my fingers as I struggled to steady my breathing. He'd tried to trap me. Again, different body, different name, same tactic. But this time, I had evidence. The recording in my pocket, the damning email, the contract with its revealing clauses. That night, from an anonymous email account, I sent a detailed package to the Medical Ethics Board. Documentation of the flawed trial protocols, evidence of patient harm, and timestamps showing when Parker had been informed of the issues and chosen to proceed anyway. I didn't include my recording or identify myself as the whistleblower. Not yet. This was just the opening move in the endgame. 3 days later, Elise appeared at my office door, her usual confidence replaced by obvious agitation. "Did you know?" she demanded without preamble, closing the door behind her. "Know what?" I asked, though I could guess. "The Ethics Board has launched an investigation into our trials." Her voice was sharp with accusation. "Someone sent them detailed information about protocol violations, patient data." I set down my pen. "That's concerning. Were there violations?" She paced the small office, the click of her heels muted by the carpeting. Parker says it's a witch hunt, a competitor trying to derail our progress. And what do you think? She stopped pacing, her expression conflicted. I think I've seen things. Data that doesn't match what's reported. Concerns dismissed without proper review. I nodded slowly. That must be troubling for you. He wants me to testify, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. To say I oversaw all safety protocols personally, that everything was properly documented and approved. Did you? Her eyes met mine, fear plainly visible. No. He kept me away from the safety review meetings. Said it wasn't my area of expertise. I considered her for a long moment. Elise had been complicit in stealing my work, but she was also Parker's next victim, being set up to take responsibility for his shortcuts. You should consult an independent attorney, I advised, before you make any statements to the ethics board. He says we need to present a united front, that any division in the team will be exploited. I leaned forward. Elise, ask yourself, if everything was done properly, why would presenting the simple truth require careful coordination? She sank into the chair opposite me, suddenly looking much younger and less sure of herself. What would you do, if you were me? I'd protect myself, I said simply, because I can guarantee that's what Parker is doing. After she left, I sat in silence, feeling strangely liberated from the fear that had driven me since my rebirth. The investigation was proceeding. The truth would emerge. And I was no longer hiding in the shadows, but openly building what should have been built years ago. Mira's vengeance was unfolding, but Nora's work was just beginning. I need to tell you something, I said to the empty room, my voice steady despite the weight of the confession I was about to make. Something I haven't told anyone since it happened. I stood before the mirror in my apartment, practicing for a conversation I might never have. The woman who stared back at me, Nora, not Mira, had changed over the past months. Her posture was straighter, her gaze more direct. The timid research assistant was gone, replaced by someone who carried herself with the confidence of a woman twice her age. The memory transfer protocol wasn't just theory, I continued, addressing my reflection. I tested it on myself first, created the backup of my neural patterns 6 months before the confrontation with Parker. Before the accident. I turned away from the mirror, moving to my desk where research notes lay spread across the surface. Not the notes I shared with my team at Helix, but the true core of my work, the complete memory transfer technology I had been perfecting in secret for years. The real reason Parker had forced me off the project. He had discovered fragments of this research in Mira's private notes. Enough to recognize its potential value, but not enough to replicate it without me. That's why he had tried to discredit me rather than simply firing me. He needed legal control of all my research, including the unpublished portions. What he hadn't known was that I had already implemented the first phase of the protocol on myself, creating a complete neural backup that remained dormant in the specialized viral vector I had designed. A vector programmed to activate only under specific conditions, like the massive trauma of my accident. I hadn't expected it to work. It was a desperate insurance policy, a way to preserve something of myself and my work if the worst happened. But it had worked. Beyond all reasonable scientific expectation, my consciousness had transferred to Nora Ellis, a compatible host in a coma, her own consciousness already fading as her brain struggled to recover from trauma. The perfect receptor for my neural pattern delivered through the blood supply we had briefly shared in the same hospital. I had awakened in her body with her cellular structure, but my memories, my knowledge, my purpose intact. It was revolutionary, terrifying, and completely unprovable without revealing who I really was, something that would destroy any credibility I had carefully rebuilt. So I kept the full extent of my breakthrough secret, focusing instead on the more conventional aspects of neural preservation that my patent covered. The technology that Parker now desperately needed to save his failing clinical trials. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Victor Kazan, Helix's CEO. Ellis, I answered. The board meeting is moved up to tomorrow morning, he said without preamble. Parker's lawyers are pushing for an immediate resolution to the patent dispute. I'll be prepared, I assured him. See that you are. There's significant pressure to reach a compromise that allows the trials to proceed. After hanging up, I returned to my desk and began organizing the documentation I would need. Financial projections, safety data, the formal partnership offer from Parker with its revealing clauses, and one more item, a sealed envelope containing ownership documents for Neurosite Holdings, the shell company that held my patent. Documents that would reveal that while I was listed as the beneficial owner, the corporate structure included provisions for distributing a significant portion of all patent royalties to a specialized trust. A trust dedicated to supporting victims of scientific misconduct and ethical violations in medical research. The next morning, I arrived at Helix headquarters an hour early, the crisp sound of legal papers being signed echoing in the nearly empty boardroom as I finalized preparations with Helix legal team. "You understand the significance of this revelation?" the head counsel asked as I signed the final document. "Completely," I confirmed. "It transforms the negotiation dynamic entirely." He nodded, gathering the paperwork into a leather portfolio. "The board will support your position based on this. Parker has significantly overplayed his hand." By the time the board members began arriving, followed by Parker and his legal team, I was calmly seated at my designated place, hands folded on the polished table surface. Parker's gaze found mine immediately, his confident smile faltering slightly when I didn't look away. Beside him, Elise appeared tense, avoiding eye contact with anyone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kazan began once everyone was seated, "we're here to resolve the patent dispute regarding neural pathway preservation technology currently held by Neurosite Holdings, of which Miss Ellis is the beneficial owner." Parker's lawyer leaned forward. "Our position remains that the core technology builds upon prior research conducted at our organization, and we're prepared to present evidence of substantial similarity." "Before we proceed down that path," I interjected calmly, "I believe there's relevant information the board should consider." All eyes turned to me as I nodded to Helix's counsel, who distributed copies of the documents I had prepared. "What you're looking at," I explained, "is the complete ownership structure of Neurosite Holdings, including the beneficiary arrangements for all patent royalties." The room fell silent as they read. Parker flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. "As you can see," I continued, 60% of all royalties from this patent are irrevocably directed to the Truth in Medical Research Foundation, which provides support for victims of ethical violations in scientific research and whistleblower protection." Parker's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he studied me with new intensity. The resemblance to Mira that I had carefully disguised, the way I tilted my head when making a point, certain speech patterns I hadn't been able to fully eliminate, suddenly seemed dangerously obvious. "This is a publicity stunt," Parker's lawyer declared. "An attempt to position Miss Ellis as an ethical crusader when the reality is she's trying to hijack years of my client's research." "That's an interesting perspective," I replied evenly, "particularly given the ongoing ethics board investigation into your clinical trials." A ripple of whispers circulated among the board members. Not everyone had been aware of the investigation. "That investigation is based on false allegations," Parker said sharply. "Is it?" I opened my own folder and removed a single sheet of paper, sliding it across to Kazan. "This is a copy of an internal email from your safety review team, documenting hippocampal degradation in trial participants. An email sent before you approached me about a partnership." Parker's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "It was mistakenly sent to me during the IT system update last week," I explained. "A fortunate error that revealed your true motivation for seeking access to my patent. You need my modifications to fix the damage your flawed protocol has already caused." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Board members exchanged concerned glances. "These are serious allegations," Kazan said carefully. "Not allegations, documented facts," I corrected. "Facts that demonstrate why independent control of this patent is essential to ensure patient safety isn't compromised by commercial pressures." Parker stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This meeting is a farce. You'll be hearing from our legal team, Miss Ellis." As he gathered his papers, his gaze locked with mine one final time, and I saw the moment recognition dawned. Not complete understanding, but a chilling sense that he had encountered me before, that I was somehow connected to his past. "Have we met before, Miss Ellis?" he asked, his voice barely audible. You remind me of someone. I met his gaze steadily. Perhaps in another life, Dr. Parker. After he and his team departed, the board quickly reached its decision. Helix would proceed with developing my technology independently, with no partnership with Parker's organization. The ethics board investigation would be allowed to run its course without corporate interference. As the meeting concluded, Elise lingered, looking lost and uncertain. When everyone else had filed out, she approached me. "The email," she said quietly, "about the trial participants. Is it true?" I nodded. I have no reason to fabricate something so easily verified. Her jasmine perfume, once cloying, now seemed diminished, as if reflecting her deflated confidence. He told me the early results were promising, that my career would be made by this project. Your career, I observed, or his reputation? She sank into a chair, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling slightly. I didn't know people were being hurt. What will you do now? I asked. I don't know. She looked up at me, studying my face with new awareness. There's something strange about you, Ellis. When you talk about Parker, it's like you've known him for years, not weeks. The moment had come sooner than I expected. I closed the door to ensure our privacy, then sat across from her. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, I began, my heart racing despite my outward calm. But I can prove enough of it to make you believe the rest. Over the next hour, I told her a carefully edited version of the truth, that I had worked with Parker before under a different identity, that he had stolen my research and pushed me out when I challenged him, that I had rebuilt my career specifically to reclaim my work and prevent him from harming patients with his reckless approach. I didn't tell her about my death and rebirth. Some truths were too fantastic, too dangerous to share. So you're what? Working undercover? Industrial espionage? Her eyes were wide with disbelief and a touch of fear. I prefer to think of it as justice, I replied. Parker has built his career on stealing others' work and discarding them when they become inconvenient. You were next, Elise. The safety issues with the trial. Who do you think would have taken the blame when they became public? The color drained from her face as understanding dawned. He's been preparing me, giving me more direct oversight of the daily trial operations, having me sign off on protocol changes. Creating a paper trail, I confirmed, while keeping you away from the actual safety data. She sat in stunned silence for several moments, the realization of how completely she had been manipulated sinking in. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. What happens now? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. The ethics board investigation will intensify in the coming weeks. Parker will try to contain the damage by sacrificing someone. Probably you, given the documentation he's already put in place. Fear flashed across her face. I could lose everything, my reputation, my career. Unless you get ahead of it, I said. The board responds more favorably to those who come forward voluntarily with information. You want me to turn on Parker? Her voice shook slightly. I want you to protect yourself, I corrected. And in doing so, help protect current and future patients from suffering harm due to his shortcuts. The jasmine scent intensified as she shifted nervously in her seat. He's powerful, connected. He could destroy me professionally. He's already planning to, I reminded her gently. The only question is whether you'll let him do it on his terms or take control of the narrative yourself. Elise stared at her hands for a long moment, then looked up with new resolve in her eyes. What exactly do you suggest I do? The International Medical Innovation Conference is next month in Geneva, I said. Parker is scheduled to present the preliminary results from the clinical trials. I've been invited to present my research as well, the first public unveiling of the patented technology. He'll use that platform to control the narrative, she realized, to present the trials as a success, regardless of the actual data. I nodded. Unless someone with first-hand knowledge of those trials presents a different perspective. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You want me to speak at the conference? The ethics board will have representatives there, I confirmed, as will the major research journals and funding bodies. It would be the perfect venue to establish yourself as a whistleblower rather than a co-conspirator. It would end my relationship with Parker, she said, though her tone suggested she had already begun to accept this reality. That relationship was already ending, I pointed out. The only question was whether you'd emerge with your professional integrity intact. The ticking of the conference room clock seemed suddenly loud in the silence that followed. Time was running out. For Elise, for the patients in the trial, and for my plan to finally bring Parker to justice. I need time to think, she said finally, rising from her seat, and to review my own records to confirm what you're telling me. Be careful, I warned. Parker is already suspicious. If he realizes you're gathering evidence. She nodded, a new wariness in her eyes. I know how to be discreet. After she left, I remained in the conference room, processing the unexpected turn our conversation had taken. I hadn't planned to reveal so much to Elise so soon, but Parker's recognition had accelerated my timeline. The conference was 4 weeks away. By then, I needed to be fully prepared, not just for my presentation, but for the public reckoning that would follow. The spotlight would be intense, the scrutiny unprecedented, and somewhere in that process, Nora Ellis might need to reveal even more of Mira Chen than I had planned. The Grand Geneva Hotel's conference center buzzed with activity as the International Medical Innovation Conference entered its second day. Researchers, physicians, and industry representatives from around the world filled the exhibition hall, networking and examining the latest technological advances. I stood before the full-length mirror in my hotel room, making final adjustments to my appearance. The woman who stared back at me bore little resemblance to either the original Mira Chen or the Nora Ellis who had started at Helix months ago. My hair was styled differently, my clothing more confident and polished, my posture emanating the authority of someone who knew her worth. On the bed lay my presentation materials, slides detailing the neural preservation technology, safety data from preliminary testing, and the sealed envelope containing my final revelation, to be opened only if circumstances required it. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Ellis? A conference assistant stood in the hallway. They're ready for your microphone check. Thank you, I replied, gathering my materials. I'll be right there. The main auditorium was already half full, attendees securing good seats for the day's headline presentations. As I stepped onto the stage for the sound check, the spotlight hit me, hot and bright against my skin, momentarily disorienting. Testing, 1, 2, I said into the microphone, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the glare. Through the brightness, I could make out two familiar figures entering through the rear doors, Parker and Elise, arriving early to observe my presentation. I hadn't spoken with Elise since our confrontation in the Helix boardroom. Whether she had decided to support my efforts or warn Parker remained to be seen. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of nervous energy as I reviewed my notes one final time and watched the auditorium fill to capacity. My presentation was scheduled immediately before Parker's, a deliberate arrangement that would allow me to establish key facts before he took the stage. Finally, the conference moderator approached the podium. Our next speaker has quickly established herself as an innovative voice in neural preservation technology, he announced. Please welcome Dr. Nora Ellis, Director of Neuropsych Research at Helix Innovations. Applause rippled through the audience as I took the stage, the spotlight once again warm against my skin. I placed my notes on the podium, took a deep breath of the recycled air tinged with the collective perfumes and colognes of hundreds of attendees, and began. Traumatic brain injury represents one of the most significant challenges in modern medicine, I started, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Not just in preserving life, but in preserving the essence of who we are, our memories, our personalities, our consciousness. For the next 20 minutes, I detailed the technology I had developed, first as Mira, now as Nora, explaining the innovative approach to neural pathway preservation. The audience was attentive, with many taking notes or recording the presentation on their devices. Then came the critical moment. While this technology holds tremendous promise, I said, my voice dropping slightly to ensure the audience leaned in. Its implementation must be guided by rigorous ethical standards and patient safety protocols. I clicked to a slide showing comparative data. This chart illustrates the cytotoxicity rates in hippocampal neurons under 2 different protocols. The standard approach currently being used in some trials and the modified approach detailed in my patent. Murmurs rippled through the audience as the stark differences became clear. The standard protocol, while simpler to implement, shows significant neuron death at 72 hours post-treatment, I explained. The modified protocol, while more complex, virtually eliminates this risk. From my peripheral vision, I could see Parker shifting uncomfortably in his front row seat. His cologne, that distinctive sandalwood and metallic blend, wafted up to the stage as he leaned forward, his expression growing increasingly tense. In the interest of patient safety and scientific integrity, I continued, I feel compelled to express concern about any ongoing trials using the unmodified protocol, given these clear safety indicators. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. I had just publicly questioned the safety of Parker's trials without directly naming him, a professional courtesy he had never extended to me as Mira. Thank you for your attention, I concluded. I'm happy to address questions. Hands shot up throughout the auditorium. The first question came from a neurosurgeon in the third row. Dr. Ellis, are you suggesting that current trials using the standard protocol should be suspended? Before I could answer, Parker rose from his seat. If I may, he interjected, his voice carrying without a microphone through years of practice commanding rooms. As the principal investigator on the most advanced trial in this field, I can assure everyone that our protocols have undergone rigorous safety review. The moderator frowned at this breach of procedure but allowed him to continue. Dr. Ellis's data, while interesting, doesn't account for the proprietary modifications we've implemented, Parker claimed smoothly. Our patient outcomes show none of the concerns she's theorizing about. I leaned into the microphone. With all due respect, Dr. Parker, the internal safety reports from your own team contradict that statement. A hush fell over the room. I had crossed the line from theoretical concern to specific allegation. Parker's smile tightened. I'm not sure what reports you're referring to, Dr. Ellis, but I can categorically state that our trials are proceeding safely and successfully, as my presentation will demonstrate shortly. Perhaps, came a new voice from the side of the stage, I can provide some clarity on this matter. All heads turned as Elise Chambers stepped forward, a tablet computer in her hands and determination in her stride. The sharp intake of breath from the audience punctuated her unexpected intervention. Dr. Chambers, the moderator acknowledged, clearly unsure how to handle this deviation from the program. You're scheduled to present with Dr. Parker later this afternoon. I believe this information is relevant to the current discussion, she insisted, her voice steady despite the tremor I could see in her hands from my position on stage. Parker half rose from his seat again. Elise, this isn't the appropriate forum. I disagree, she cut him off, approaching the steps to the stage. May I, Dr. Ellis? I nodded, stepping aside to give her access to the podium. The jasmine scent of her perfume drifted past as she connected her tablet to the presentation system. A moment later, internal documents appeared on the giant screen behind us. As senior research coordinator for the neural preservation trial, Elise began, her voice gaining strength with each word, I have access to all safety monitoring data. These reports, dated 6 weeks ago, clearly document hippocampal degradation in 73% of participants receiving the unmodified treatment. The audience erupted in shocked whispers. Parker's face had gone ashen. Furthermore, Elise continued, swiping to the next document, this email chain confirms that Dr. Parker was informed of these findings and instructed the team to continue the trial without protocol modification or participant notification. It was more damning than I had expected, harder evidence than I had managed to gather myself. Elise hadn't just decided to support my efforts, she had brought a smoking gun. This is outrageous, Parker finally managed, standing fully now. These documents are being presented without context. The issues were temporary and resolved with standard interventions. Were they? Elise challenged, displaying another document. Because according to the 3-month follow-up MRIs, the degradation had progressed in all affected participants. Information that was deliberately excluded from the interim report submitted to the Oversight Committee. I watched in stunned silence as Elise systematically dismantled Parker's defense, presenting document after document detailing the ethical violations that had occurred under his direction. The moderator made no attempt to intervene, recognizing the significance of what was unfolding. Throughout the audience, I noticed several people in formal attire taking particular interest, making notes and occasionally exchanging glances. Representatives from the Medical Ethics Board, I realized, who, had attended specifically to gather information on the investigation already underway. Finally, as Elise concluded her presentation, one of them stood up. "Dr. Parker," she said, her voice carrying the weight of official authority, "I'm Dr. Reynolds from the National Medical Ethics Review Board. In light of this information, I am officially notifying you that your research license is suspended pending a full investigation. All trials under your supervision are to cease immediately." Parker's face, already pale, now took on a gray tinge. His cologne seemed to intensify as sweat beaded on his forehead. "This is unprecedented," he protested. "You can't make that determination based on a theatrical ambush at a conference." "The documents speak for themselves," Dr. Reynolds replied coolly, "and they corroborate evidence already in our possession. Security will escort you from the premises. Please do not attempt to contact any trial participants or research staff until our investigation is complete." As if on cue, two conference security personnel appeared at Parker's side. For a moment, it seemed he might resist. Then his shoulders slumped, the fight visibly draining from him as he realized the completeness of his defeat. As he was escorted past the stage, his gaze locked with mine one final time. In his eyes, I saw the dawning of full recognition. Not just that I was somehow connected to Mira Chen, but the impossible truth that I somehow was Mira returned to witness his downfall. "You," he whispered too quietly for anyone but me to hear, "it's not possible." I held his gaze steadily. "Justice always finds a way, Dr. Parker." The remainder of the conference passed in a whirlwind of interviews, inquiries, and impromptu strategy sessions with the ethics board. Elise was hailed as a courageous whistleblower, while I was celebrated for the technology that could potentially save the patients harmed by Parker's reckless protocols. By evening, when I finally returned to my hotel room, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling as I processed the day's events. It had gone better than I could have hoped. Parker's reputation in ruins, his research license suspended, his trials halted before more patients could be harmed. The path was clear for my technology to be developed properly, ethically, under my direction. Yet something felt unfinished. Parker had lost his professional standing, but he hadn't faced the full consequences of his actions. Not just against me, but against all the others he had used and discarded throughout his career. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts, an unknown number. "Dr. Ellis speaking?" I answered cautiously. "It's over." Parker's voice slurred and desperate. "My career, my reputation, everything I built. Gone." I sat up slowly. "Dr. Parker, I'm surprised you're calling me." "Who are you?" he demanded. "Really? Because you're not just some random researcher who happened to replicate Mira's work." "Perhaps I'm simply someone who believes in scientific integrity," I suggested, my voice steadier than my racing heart. "No." A bitter laugh. "The way you look at me. The specific concerns you raised, it's too personal, too precise." I remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. "I need to see you," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Please, I have to understand what's happening." The vulnerability in his voice was jarring, so different from the confident mentor who had once guided me, or the calculating betrayer who had destroyed me. "What purpose would that serve?" I asked. "Closure," he replied simply. "For both of us." I considered refusing. My revenge was complete. There was nothing to gain from a private confrontation. And yet, something in me needed this final chapter. Needed to look him in the eyes, not across a crowded auditorium or boardroom, but intimately, personally, as I had once looked at my mentor. "My office at Helix," I said finally. "Tomorrow at 7 p.m., after hours when the building is quiet." "I'll be there," he promised before the line went dead. As I set down the phone, I wondered if I was making a mistake. Parker was cornered, desperate, potentially dangerous. But I had faced death once before because of him and returned. What more could he do to me now? The Helix building was nearly deserted when I arrived the next evening. Just a few security guards and late-working researchers scattered through the vast complex. I nodded to the guard at the front desk, who recognized me and waved me through without question. My office on the research floor was exactly as I had left it before the conference. Organized, pristine, with the faint scent of the lemon oil I used to polish the desk lingering in the air. I switched on the lamp rather than the overhead lights, creating a pool of warmth in the otherwise dim space. Then I waited. At precisely 7 p.m., a knock came at the door. "Come in," I called, my voice steadier than my nerves. Parker entered, and I nearly gasped at the transformation 3 days had wrought. Gone was the impeccably dressed, confident researcher who had dominated rooms with his presence. In his place stood a disheveled man with rumpled clothing, stubbled cheeks, and red-rimmed eyes. The scent hit me next, not his signature cologne, but the sharp tang of alcohol that seemed to emanate from his pores. He had been drinking heavily. "Dr. Ellis," he greeted me, his voice hoarse, "thank you for seeing me." "Please sit." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, watching as he lowered himself into it with the careful movements of someone not entirely trusting their coordination. For a long moment, he simply stared at me, his gaze moving over my features with desperate intensity, as if trying to solve a complex equation. "You look nothing like her," he said finally. "Different bone structure, different coloring. And yet—" "Who do you think I am, Dr. Parker?" I asked quietly. He leaned forward, bracing his hands on his knees. "That's what I can't figure out. A relative of Mira's seeking revenge? Someone she confided in before her death? Or something?" He hesitated. "Something impossible." "Does it matter?" I spread my hands. "The facts of what happened remain the same, regardless of who brought them to light." "It matters to me." His voice cracked slightly. "I need to understand." I considered him for a long moment. This broken version of the man who had once seemed invincible to me. The man who had been both my greatest mentor and my ultimate betrayer. "What you did to Dr. Chen was unconscionable," I said finally. "You stole her research, destroyed her reputation, and when she threatened to expose you, she died in a suspicious accident." "I didn't cause her accident," he protested, a flash of the old Parker emerging through his desperation. "I never wanted her dead. I just needed her discredited enough that her counterclaims wouldn't be taken seriously." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" I asked coldly. "That you only intended to destroy her career, not end her life?" He ran a trembling hand through his unkempt hair. "You don't understand. The pressure I was under, the investors were threatening to pull out if we didn't show results. The patent had to be filed, and her approach would have delayed everything by months. Her approach would have prevented the hippocampal degradation your patients are now suffering," I reminded him. "The very modification I patented and offered to you, which you plan to use, then blame me for the previous damage." He didn't deny it. Instead, tears welled in his eyes, streaking down his face unheeded. I had never seen Parker cry. Not when research failed, not when funding was cut, not even at Mira's memorial service, which he had attended with appropriately somber expressions of regret. "I can make it right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can publicly acknowledge that Mira's original research was correct, that her approach was the right one all along. I can give her the credit she deserves." "From prison?" I asked softly. "Because that's where the ethics board investigation is likely to send you." "I have connections," he insisted, a hint of his old confidence resurfacing. "People who owe me favors. If you could just intervene. Suggest that my intentions were misguided but not malicious." My fingers were calm against the smooth surface of my desk as I considered his plea. This was the moment I had fantasized about during those first dark days after waking in Nora's body. Parker begging for mercy, offering to restore Mira's reputation when it was far too late to help her. "Why should I help you?" I asked. "After everything you've done?" "Because you're better than me," he said simply. "Whatever your connection to Mira, relative, friend, or something I can't explain, you've always put the science first. The patients. That's what she would have wanted too." For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine the scenario he proposed. Parker publicly rehabilitating Mira's reputation, acknowledging her contributions, while receiving some leniency in return. It would be a kind of justice, but it would not be enough. "No," I said. the single syllable dropping into the quiet room like a stone. Parker blinked as if he couldn't comprehend the rejection. No? No, I repeated, rising from my chair. You don't get to manipulate your way out of this, as you've done with every other consequence in your life. And Mira Chen doesn't need your belated acknowledgement to validate her work? Please, he begged, his voice breaking. My career, my life's work, is over, I finished for him, as Mira's was the day you betrayed her. I moved around the desk, standing before him with nothing between us. There's something else you should know. The ethics committee that will determine your professional fate? I was appointed its chairperson yesterday. His face crumpled in defeat as he understood the finality of his situation. And one more thing, I continued, unable to resist delivering this final revelation. The patent royalties from my technology, the ones that will eventually be worth millions when it's properly implemented, are being directed to a special fund. A fund that will provide financial support to everyone whose careers you've damaged or destroyed over the years. Severance packages, you might call them, for all your victims. You can't prove, he began weakly. I don't need to prove anything. The fund isn't punitive, it's restorative, and it's already been established. The papers were signed yesterday. He stared up at me, defeat written in every line of his face. Who are you? He whispered one final time. I smiled slightly. I'm the future of neural preservation technology, Dr. Parker. The future you tried to prevent, but ultimately made possible. After he left, shoulders slumped and steps unsteady, I remained in my office for a long time, watching the city lights come alive as darkness fell. The confrontation had not brought the sense of triumph I had expected. Instead, I felt strangely hollow, as if vengeance had emptied something from me rather than filled it. But as I gathered my things to leave, I realized something else had taken its place. A sense of purpose beyond revenge. The technology I had created could help people recover from trauma, preserve essential memories, maybe eventually even save lives as it had in its own way saved mine. That would be Mira's true legacy. Not the downfall of one man, but the healing of many. 1 year later, I stood in the observation room of University Hospital's Neuroscience Center, watching through the glass as a young woman underwent the neural pathway preservation treatment. The sterile hospital environment, once triggering memories of my rebirth in Nora's body, now felt comforting, a place of healing rather than trauma. Her intracranial pressure is normalizing, Dr. Levine noted, checking the monitors. Neural activity patterns stabilizing. The treatment is taking effect. I nodded, satisfaction warming me. This was the 17th patient to receive the treatment since its official approval 4 months ago. All previous recipients had shown remarkable recovery from traumatic brain injuries that would have left them with significant impairment under traditional protocols. Families waiting for an update, Dr. Levine said. Would you like to join me? No, I declined gently. This is your department now. I'm just visiting. He smiled, acknowledging the truth of this. After the Parker scandal and subsequent reorganization at Helix, I had stepped away from direct clinical work, focusing instead on the Neural Renewal Foundation I had established with the patent royalties. As Dr. Levine left to speak with the family, I made my way through the hospital corridors to the research wing, where several of my former colleagues from Parker's lab now worked. They had been innocent of his ethical violations, but their careers had been tainted by association nonetheless. The foundation had provided grants to help them continue their legitimate research. Dr. Patel looked up from his microscope as I entered the lab. Dr. Ellis, we weren't expecting you today. Just checking in on the hippocampal regeneration project, I explained. The board is eager for an update at next week's meeting. He straightened, a hint of humble acknowledgement in his eyes as he gestured to the sample slides arranged on his workbench. We've made significant progress. The modified protocol is showing promising results in reversing damage from the original trials. Those trials, Parker's trials, had left 17 patients with progressive memory degradation. Helping them had become the Foundation's first priority after Parker's downfall. Excellent, I said, genuinely pleased. Send me the complete data when you have a moment. As I continued through the research areas, I was greeted with respect and genuine warmth by scientists who had once known me as Mira Chen, and had, in many cases, stood by silently as Parker dismantled her reputation. They didn't know who I really was, of course, but They knew what my foundation had done for them and for the patients harmed by Parker's recklessness. Their acknowledgement of my contributions was satisfaction enough. I didn't need them to know the full truth. My final stop was the pediatric neurology department, where I had arranged to meet its new director, someone I hadn't seen in several months. Elise Chambers stood by the nurse's station, reviewing charts with a resident. Her hair was shorter now, her clothing less flashy but still elegant. The transformation from Parker's ambitious protege to respected physician had suited her. She looked up as I approached, recognition and a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. "Dr. Ellis," she greeted me, dismissing the resident with a nod. "Right on time." "Dr. Chambers," I replied. "Your department looks impressive." "Thanks to your foundation's grant," she acknowledged, "we've been able to expand our research program significantly." We walked together toward her office, an awkward tension between us that had never fully dissipated since the conference a year ago. Elise had been hailed as a whistleblower for her courage in exposing Parker, while I had become known for the technology that was helping repair the damage he had caused. Our paths had diverged but remained strangely parallel. "How are the former trial participants responding to the reversal protocol?" I asked as we entered her office. "Better than expected," she replied, pulling up data on her computer screen. 13 of the 17 are showing significant improvement. The remaining 4 have stabilized with no further degradation. I nodded, genuinely pleased. This was what mattered now, healing, not revenge. "You never told me," Elise said suddenly, turning from the screen to face me directly. "How you knew? About Parker? About the trials? About all of it? Not the full truth." I met her gaze steadily. "Does it matter now?" "To me, yes." Her jasmine perfume, once overpowering, was now just a subtle note in the air between us. Because sometimes when you talk about certain aspects of the research, it's as if you've been working on it far longer than Nora Ellis has existed in this field. A chill ran through me. Elise was too perceptive, too close to a truth that could never be fully explained or proven. "We all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us," I said carefully. I studied Dr. Chen's published work extensively. Her approach made sense to me in a way Parker's never did. Elise studied me for a long moment, then smiled slightly. "Well, whatever your methods, the results speak for themselves. You've done more good in 1 year than most researchers accomplish in a lifetime." We exchanged a firm handshake, not friends perhaps, but colleagues with a cautious respect for each other that had been hard-won through the crucible of Parker's downfall. As I left the hospital, the setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. My car, a different model than the one that had plunged off the bridge with Mira inside, waited in its reserved space, a symbol of the new life I had built from the ashes of the old. Instead of going directly home, I drove to my private laboratory, a space not affiliated with Helix or the Foundation, where I could pursue the more radical aspects of my research without institutional oversight or curious colleagues.